Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to warmly welcome you all to the 25th Research, Reflection and Practice Forum today. This marks a very special occasion in our knowledge sharing and learning activities. Today's webinar is on poverty and inequality, addressing root causes and overcoming systemic barriers, is organized together with the Asian Development Bank in lieu of the International Day of Poverty Eradication that falls tomorrow, the 17th of October. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Hasita Wickramasinghe of the ADB for her support in this venture. Worldwide, poverty is an injustice to humanity in a polarized world of wealth distribution. Sri Lanka's surge from a 4% poverty indicator to 30% of people living in poverty in just over 2 years due to mismanagement of the economy and COVID-19. Today, the complete eradication of poverty is a serious challenge in a fast-paced, technologically moving world. Yet, it is a right for all citizens of the world to be free of poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, without much ado, to begin this webinar, I would like to warmly invite Professor Kamina Gunaratne, Chairperson of SEPA, to say a few words.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this forum today. Tomorrow is International Day for the Eradication of Poverty, and it is very fitting that this forum is organized by SEPA because, as our name indicates, our mandate is to study poverty and to offer solutions to overcome it. Poverty remains a formidable challenge in our pursuit of a more equitable world and a world where basic human rights are fulfilled. Eradication of poverty is also the underlying objective of the Sustainable Development Goals. In the last few years, we in Sri Lanka have seen an alarming increase in poverty, which is a matter of concern to all of us. And it is imperative that we work together to find sustainable solutions. Today's forum is particularly meaningful because it is the 25th Research, Reflection and Practices session initiated by the Training and Capacity Building platform of SEPA. We are very grateful to the Asian Development Bank for partnering with us in making this event possible. And your presence and your support here also enhances our collective ability to foster dialogue and action. I would like to thank in particular our panelists, Dr. Babke Babajanian of the Asian Development Bank, Dr. Martha Shulha from the World Bank, and Dr. Herat Gunatilaka, Executive Director of SEPA, joining with us from different time zones. Your presence and contributions are crucial as we discuss ways to address global poverty, a persistent injustice that affects millions of people. I would also like to thank the SEPA team for their hard work in organizing this event, and it reflects SEPA's continuing commitment to address issues of poverty and to find sustainable solutions to eradicate it. Thank you for being here.
Poverty is one of the most pressing issues that the poor face. Poverty is a major issue today in Sri Lanka. The need for action is urgent. We are working tirelessly to create a deeper understanding of development issues relating to poverty. We transform lives, from grassroots to reshaping policies and practices. We are the Center for Poverty Analysis. SEPA is a dynamic think tank taking the lead in poverty-related research for Sri Lanka. Launched in May 2001 by 9 dedicated Sri Lankan professionals, we recognized the need for practical guidance in poverty-related policies and set out to bridge the gap by offering services grounded in real research that addresses market needs while contributing to shaping policy. SEPA strives to influence poverty-related development policy at national, regional, sectoral, program and project levels. Our mission is to be a leading organization providing independent analysis of poverty with a view to shaping policy that affects the lives and livelihoods of vulnerable women, men and children in Sri Lanka and the region.
A world in which decision making, especially where it affects the lives and livelihoods of vulnerable women, men and children, is based on non-partisan, robust evidence.
වර්තමානයේ පවතින ආර්ථික අර්බුදය මගින් ශ්‍රී ලංකාව දරිද්‍රතාවය තුරන් කිරීම පිළිබඳව ලබා තිබූ විශිෂ්ට ජයග්‍රහණයන් සියල්ල ආපසු හරවා ඇත. අද අප ජනගහනයෙන් 3/1 දරිද්‍රතාවයෙන් පෙළෙන අතර තවත් බහුතර සංඛ්‍යාවක් දරිද්‍රතාවයට නැවත ඇදවැටීමේ අවදානමකට ලක්ව සිටිනවා. මේ තත්ත්වයට අනුකූලව දරිද්‍රතාවයේ තුරන් කිරීමට අදාළ ප්‍රතිපත්ති පර්යේෂණ කිරීමට ඒ පිළිබඳ උපදෙස් සැපයීමට දරිද්‍රතා විශ්ලේෂණ කේන්ද්‍රය කැප වී සිටිනවා.
SEPA's efforts to address poverty-related issues revolve around 6 key themes: social cohesion and reconciliation, natural resources, climate and poverty, gender and development, basic services and social protection, livelihoods and employment, labour migration.
Coming on to 15 years since the end of the Civil War, what led to it, the different narratives of the conflict and the visceral socio-economic impacts of it are still very much present in the country. Our thematic's aim is to study and develop an intersectional understanding of this.
Natural resources provide critical functions for life. When natural resources are depleted, it exacerbates existing insecurities and injustices that make the poor more vulnerable. So this thematic concentrates on solutions that enhance the relationships between people and the planet.
Having a gendered analysis across SEPA's thematic areas ensures that the research and resultant policy recommendations that we devise take into consideration gender as one of the many intersections of poverty and development in relation to factors such as religion, ethnicity, caste, class, and socio-economic factors.
I'm leading the thematic on basic services and social protection. But in an applied sense, what we are doing is probing into poverty. That is to say, the measurement of poverty, which is very much required for operating social safety nets. And then of course understanding the causes of poverty, but more importantly in the current context try to understand what's said as poverty vulnerability and how to alleviate poverty vulnerability during an economic crisis.
SEPA's employment and livelihood thematic focuses on how people move out of poverty, how people fall into poverty, or how people stay in poverty through the secure livelihoods that they have access to. We are particularly concerned about how these multiple ongoing crises at the national level and the global level shape these livelihood choices and bring about sustainable change for their lives and their families' lives.
Looking back at the establishment of SEPA in 2001, I feel it's quite important to keep in mind the guiding principles that were involved when conceptualizing SEPA. And one guiding principle was the fact that SEPA was not supposed to be a pure research organization, but rather a hybrid that would, on the basis of applied research, try to provide services to clients, and thirdly, influence public discourse and policy making. The second principle, very important, was to not look at SEPA as an isolated unit, but as an organization within a larger landscape of other organizations that would contribute to the public discourse on poverty, but not claim to be the one and only. So it was an impetus right from the start that SEPA should cultivate good working relationships and even form alliances with other organizations and initiatives in Sri Lanka as well as internationally.
Today, SEPA is actively engaged in combating the effects of Sri Lanka's most severe economic crisis, an endeavour that is no small feat. We believe that poverty is an injustice that should be overcome, and that overcoming poverty involves changing policies and practices nationally and internationally, as well as working with people in poverty.
Api SEPA.
Nangal SEPA.
Let me now take you through today's program. We have three eminent speakers. Each one will make a short presentation. And at the end of the three, we will open this up for an engaging Q&A session, online and on-site. Let me now introduce the first speaker, Dr. Babakan Bajanan, who will speak on the understanding of poverty and inequality and the role of social policy. Dr. Babakan Bajanan is a social development specialist, social protection, from the ADB Social Development Practice Team. Dr. Babakan Babajanan, welcome to the forum, joining us from the ADB headquarters in Manila. Dr. Babajanan is involved in operational work in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, providing technical assistance, focusing on adaptive and shock responsive social protection, developing inclusive, resilient social protection systems, nutrition, and social protection indicators in the Asia and Pacific. Prior to joining ADB, he worked full-time at HelpAge International, the Overseas Development Institute, and the World Bank. For over 10 years, he was a lecturer at the London School of Economics, where he designed and taught postgraduate courses on design and delivery of social protection and evidence-based policy design and implementation. Dr. Babajanan has a PhD in social policy from the London School of Economics and is a policy expert. I warmly welcome once again Dr. Babajanan to take us through his presentation from an international perspective on the understanding of poverty and inequality and the role of social policy. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Indika, for this kind introduction, and thanks to SEPA for inviting me to this webinar on this very, very important topic. So in the next 10, 15 minutes, I would like to reflect on how our understanding of poverty and inequality is crucial for the kind of policies and programs we're supporting, and ultimately for addressing the needs, or how we address the needs of poor and vulnerable people. I will discuss how the evolution of these concepts have affected development discourse and practice. I will also touch on ADB's approach to poverty reduction, the most latest approach to poverty reduction, after which I will make a case for social protection as a key poverty reduction instrument. And finally, I would outline several policy directions for tackling poverty and inequality in Sri Lanka. So let me take a trip back 24 years to when the World Bank's World Development Report on Poverty was published. I see this as a very significant breakthrough in the prevailing approach to poverty reduction. It acknowledged the importance of both economic and social dimensions of poverty, and ultimately paved the way for the acceptance of social policies, and ultimately many years later of social protection in addressing poverty and inequality. This report preceded, of course, years of critical thought, particularly from the Global South, that challenged the narrow economistic perspective in the development paradigm that emphasizes the omnipotent role of the market in bringing poverty reduction, the so-called trickle-down effect of economic growth. And so the significance of this report in bringing these critical thoughts to the forefront of policymaking. And now, if I was to just acknowledge a few contributions of the report, namely the fact that it recognized that poverty is a multidimensional problem, both in terms of its particular dimensions, in terms of not just material poverty, but also social dimensions and political dimensions, security, voice, and so on, but also drivers. So the focus on what are the root causes of these deprivations. And these drivers are located in different spheres of a society, and not just in the economic sphere. So, of course, it's important to recognize the significance of high and sustainable rates of economic growth and bringing about poverty reduction. This is undeniable. However, it's important to also acknowledge that economic growth should benefit the sectors of economy where the poor are concentrated. And most importantly, it's important to recognize that economic growth alone is not sufficient to reduce poverty and inequality. And in this report, they outline 3 different pillars that could bring about poverty reduction. And these are opportunity, empowerment, and security. And what it really meant, there was an emphasis on the importance of recognizing that people had differentiated access to resources and opportunities, and that this access was very much determined by the existing income and social inequality. That is where they stand in a society and what kind of identity markers they have, including gender, ethnicity, caste, race, and so on. So in order to bring about change, there needs to be some sort of progressive redistributional change. And that means that there needs to be a change in the way institutional, social, and political political pillars of a society function and support people's well-being. So this is very essential, and this is really this should be recognized and used by everyone as the key foundation to attempts to promote poverty reduction in any context. And now this has also obviously translated into operational approaches, namely in the so-called pro-poor growth approach, but also the inclusive growth approach. And here, obviously, ADB's inclusive growth a strategic agenda was a dominant agenda for many years. It was adopted in 2008, and up until now, it remains the key foundation of ADB's approach to poverty reduction, except for we now stress the importance of both inclusive and sustainable growth as the key foundations of poverty reduction. Now, here I would like to give you a brief idea about ADB's approach to poverty reduction and how we see our development objectives in light of our experience to date. So I have mentioned here key 5 strategic focus areas that ADB prioritizes in its latest strategic report. And the last pillar, resilience and empowerment, is the pillar that stresses the importance of social dimensions that should be seen in conjunction with the economic dimensions. And here you can see I've unpacked this into various issues. And here you see the importance of building resilience and addressing human vulnerability, something that was articulated very prominently in SEPA's video at the very start of this webinar. The importance of promoting human capital through development, through investment in education and health, and also reducing inequality of opportunity, which is something, again, goes back to this idea that access to resources and opportunities are constrained for people who have different identity markers, who have different social characteristics, and therefore there needs to be a recognition of these intersectional inequalities and as a way of better managing access of disadvantaged groups to resources, services, and opportunities. Now, having said that, I would like to spend the rest of this presentation on making a case for social protection. And I do think, obviously, people who are in the audience reviewing us today, I'm sure they're aware of the importance of social protection as a poverty reduction tool. However, I do think there is still a need to make a case for social protection and to promote this agenda, to ensure that social protection is viewed as a key instrument that is equal in its significance to, say, macroeconomic policies and sectoral policies. And here I have highlighted several contributions of social protection that have been exposed by empirical evidence. These are not debatable facts. These are empirical evidence-based notions. And I would like to briefly take you through them. First of all, social protection enables access to resources and opportunities and reduces life cycle vulnerabilities and inequalities. Cash transfers reduce food security and malnutrition, but they also enhance access to health, education, and social services. And the second aspect where social protection can be extremely potent and powerful is the fact that it not only addresses life cycle vulnerabilities, but it can also address more larger scale covariate shocks and stresses that are related to the crisis events related to economic, health, and climate related shocks and stresses. Then finally, obviously here I'm defining social protection broadly, and I'm including active labor market policies and programs here. So they are very important for enhancing skills, access to information, incentives of people, and improving the functioning of the labor market, for example, by promoting employment services and matching employers and employees and so on. Finally, the economic inclusion or the graduation approach also has become prominent in the last 5 years, and it's proven to be very effective in promoting access to market assets, network opportunities, and obviously the ADB has been supported along with the World Bank the so-called empowerment program, which is based on this graduation approach that seeks to promote access to productive resources among the poorest households in Sri Lanka. And then finally, I will close with some recommendations, some policy considerations, as it were, for supporting social sectors in Sri Lanka, and particularly in social protection, as a way of supporting the poverty reduction agenda, inequality reduction agenda in the country. So I've highlighted here 3 main pillars that I think are extremely important for supporting the social dimensions of development in Sri Lanka. First of all, it's the need to strengthen the social protection system and institutional capacity. And as part of this, it's important to further strengthen and develop a coherent policy and a policy framework for supporting life cycle vulnerabilities. And underpinning this policy framework would be the need to develop and upgrade information system and integrated digital solutions as a way of supporting the administrative basis for policy linkages. And then adaptive shock responsive mechanisms are extremely important, especially for a country such as Sri Lanka. And social protection can, as I mentioned, fulfill the function of providing not only resources for helping people cope with poverty when disaster strikes, but also building their adaptive capacity, building their resilience between shocks and stresses. So the second pillar is the need to facilitate access to social services. And here I would like to highlight the importance of an integrated approach for addressing multiple dimensions of poverty and vulnerability, and the need to recognize the sort of the intersecting constraints that poor and vulnerable people face. So strengthening governance of social services, institutional partnerships arrangements are extremely important, for example, in developing aged care services. And then finally, the third pillar is about promoting active labor market and economic inclusion programs. And here, a number of factors can be important, including supporting human capital development through skill development, further investments in education and health, facilitating access to employment services, linkages between different types of stakeholders, between the public, private, and non-governmental sectors, as a way of supporting job creation and job facilitation. Also important to address some of the key structural constraints to people's participation in the labor market, again, with a focus on some of the constraints that the more disadvantaged members of the society face, including women, the youth, older people, as well as be mindful of urban and rural differences. And finally, continuing with the economic inclusion program, supporting livelihoods would be important and can be a way of complementing active labor market policies in Sri Lanka. So thank you very much for your attention. And just to summarize, what I wanted to really highlight in this presentation is the importance of how we understand and conceptualize poverty, and the importance of aligning economic and social dimensions of poverty reduction. And that would determine the array of different policy arrangements that we use in tackling poverty and tackling inequality. And I would also like to mention the importance of social protection as a tool that is becoming more and more popular in development practice and is embraced by governments and international organizations as an instrument that can be used alongside with other policy instruments to tackle poverty and inequality. Thank you very much for your attention.
And Dr. Shaw worked at the University of Sussex and the Imperial College in London. Her research and policy interests lie in political economy, inequality, and poverty. Dr. Shaw holds a PhD from the University of Sussex in England with a doctoral thesis focusing on political preference and inequality. I warmly welcome Dr. Martha Shaw to deliver her talk on poverty and inequality, measurement, trends, and challenges. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Indika, and thank you everyone for making the time to participate to this forum, and thanks for the invitation. Let me just quickly share my slides. I hope you can all see them. So I am very quickly, I couldn't hear the whole introduction, although I'm sure it was a very comprehensive one. I'm Marta Schoch. I'm an economist at the World Bank, and I'm part of the poverty and equity team who works on Sri Lanka and other countries in South Asia. So for today's talk, I thought I would give you a brief overview of how we measure poverty at the World Bank, a bit the history of poverty measurement at the World Bank. And then I would like to share with you some of the latest trends in poverty and inequality in South Asia as a way to benchmark Sri Lanka to other countries in the region, as well as showing you some additional welfare metrics that are related to poverty and have to do with households' living standards. And I'll conclude with a few facts on poverty and inequality in Sri Lanka since 2019, in order for us to then continue the conversation with Dr. Herath's presentation that is going to be more focused on Sri Lanka and policies for poverty alleviation in the country. So, as you know, poverty is a complex phenomenon, and there are very different notions of poverty, but most of these are related to living standards and to the way that people live their lives, and it means they have to live these lives in a dignified way. So at the World Bank, we have several poverty measurements, but the most famous is, and the most well-known and used internationally, is the International Poverty Line. So using this definition of poverty, someone is said to live in poverty when their well-being is below a certain threshold. So one of the key things we do at the World Bank is try and measure this threshold in a way that can be compared across countries, and for the same countries or for the same country over time, in a way that we can track progress towards poverty reduction and assess how different policies are bringing poverty down. So as I said, the primary measure of poverty is the share of the population that is living below the international poverty line. The most famous poverty line is the $1 per person per day. So someone was said to be in poverty if living on the equivalent of less than $1 per person per day. This line was originally established by Ravalion in 1990 and has since been revised to more recent data on prices and purchasing powers. The latest poverty line, the international poverty line that is currently being used by the World Bank, is $2.15. And we will have a new purchasing power parity revision in 2025. So there will be a new international poverty line next year. So the share of the population that lives below the international poverty line is the measure of poverty that is used internationally to track progress towards goal 1, which is a comprehensive goal that aims at eradicating poverty around the world. So if we look at the latest numbers, you might think that the $2.15 is a very low living standards, and in fact it is. It's a measure of extreme poverty. However, and there's been considerable progress toward poverty eradication at this line over the past 30 years, but still about 700 million people live in extreme poverty as of 2024. And South Asia contributes to around a fifth of the global poor at this poverty line. The contribution of South Asia was much larger at the beginning of the period, as it was the contribution of East Asia and Pacific. So two big countries like India and China contributed mostly to this contribution at the beginning of the period. And in more recent years, extreme poverty has become a more sub-Saharan African phenomenon. But this doesn't mean that there are no extreme poor in South Asia, as we will see later on. This screenshot and many of the charts I will show you today are from the Poverty and Inequality platform, which is a website, a data platform maintained by the World Bank that underlines all the official poverty measures that the World Bank uses. Yes? Oh, sorry, I don't know if someone is writing in the chat because I'm not see it. So as I was saying, it's a resource that is accessible online, and all these there's a lot of data available that is very comprehensive and covers a lot of countries in the world. As I was just saying, the 2.15 poverty line is an absolute and monetary poverty measure, which is used to capture extreme poverty in a comparable way across countries and over time. But as I was already hinting at, poverty is a complex phenomenon that evolves as countries become richer and living standards change, both over time and in the same period of time, you would have countries at different development levels for which a 2.15 poverty line might be too strict of a threshold to identify someone as poor and non-poor. For this reason, the World Bank has adopted 2 additional poverty lines that measure poverty in a more relevant way for lower middle income countries like Sri Lanka and most of the countries in South Asia, and the 6.85 poverty line that is more relevant for upper middle income countries. Think of East Asian countries or Latin American. The 685 poverty line, however, can also be used in South Asia as a measure of vulnerability. So this is trying to capture a share of the population that is still living in a monetary deprived way, but perhaps not as deprived as someone living under 3.65 per person per day. So if we look at the trend at the 365 poverty line, we see that the figure looks very different, and we have almost 2 billion people worldwide living on less than 365 per person per day. And here South Asia still has a very prominent role in contributing to extreme poverty. South Asia, in fact, contributes to about 40% of the global poor at this poverty line. Which means that poverty is still very much a concern in the region, and as we will see in Sri Lanka. Just to conclude this initial part on measurement of poverty at the World Bank, and there's loads of resources that I will share at the end of the presentation, and that I would encourage you to look at if this is of interest. As I was saying, all the measures that I've mentioned so far and that I will focus on for most of the presentation are absolute and monetary poverty measures. So they define poverty based on a monetary value, so how much money a household or a person has to carry their lives and satisfy their needs. And it's an absolute line because it's set at a given threshold and that doesn't change over time. Sorry. The pros of this approach is that it allows to have an international and intertemporal comparable poverty measurement, and that in some ways it's easier to measure, although it very much relies on the presence of household survey microdata, which is a challenge for many countries in the world, but also in South Asia and also in Sri Lanka. I will briefly touch on this towards the end of my presentation. However, it has also some limitations. So we know that poverty is a multidimensional concept, and the monetary metric might not capture the full extent of deprivation that a household faces. And it can become less relevant, as I was saying, as countries become richer. So for this reason, the World Bank also tracks two additional measures of poverty: the multidimensional poverty measure, which is very similar to the multidimensional poverty index, and a societal poverty line. So the multidimensional poverty measure captures deprivations under the monetary dimension, like the international poverty line, but it also has dimensions related to education and access to infrastructure. And the societal poverty line is a relative poverty measure that is capped at the international poverty line, but that then increases as the median income of countries increases. It's a bit of a complex concept, and I don't want to go too much into detail, so I encourage you to refer to the Poverty and Shared Prosperity report. It's a biannual report that the World Bank produces and publishes. The latest version is coming out for End of Poverty Day in a few days. I think if not tomorrow, the day after. So take a look at that report if you're interested in knowing more about these measures. Okay, I think that was enough of poverty measurement refresher. So let me show you a few graphs on how poverty and inequality have been evolving in South Asia and Sri Lanka over time, and some interesting trends that are emerging from the data. As I was mentioning in the introduction, progress towards extreme poverty eradication has been substantial in South Asia between 1990 and 2024. And this has also been due to sustained economic growth in the region, but also we will see a bit later, to a variety of factors. But of course, there was a very strong economic growth, and a lot of people that were living in under extreme deprivation have moved out of poverty by 2024. Most countries in the regions have a poverty rate at the 2.15 poverty line that is below 10%. While this may seem low, however, this is still a lot of people. India contributes to a lot of the poor, South Asian poor at the 2.15 poverty line. But about 200 million people live on less than 2.15 per person per day in South Asia. Notwithstanding this progress, once we look at the trend in poverty reduction at a higher poverty line, so the 3.65, we see that the poverty rates remain elevated in the region and range between a very low poverty rate in Maldives and a much higher poverty rate in India and Pakistan, where about 40% of the population lives in poverty. Sri Lanka, of the latest official number from the 2019 Household Income and Expenditure Survey, had a poverty rate at the 365 poverty line of 11%, but as we will see, things have changed dramatically since 2019. This slower progress at the 365 poverty line translates in over 700 million people still living below 365 per person per day in South Asia. So progress at desired line has been much lower. So if we compare Sri Lanka to other countries in the region, we see that up until 2019, which is the latest year for which we have a household survey in the country, Sri Lanka was doing relatively well. So we have a poverty rate at the 365 poverty line of 11%. But then if we look at a measure of poverty that is looking at vulnerable groups, we see that at the 685, the poverty rate is much higher. So this means that almost half of the country already in 2019 was living with less than $6.85 per person per day. We also, as a, part of the webinar is also interested in looking at inequality. And one of the things that emerges is that economic growth is one of the key drivers of poverty reduction. However, this doesn't mean that the gains from economic growth are distributed equally. So if we look at inequality trends in Sri Lanka relative to other countries in the regions, we see that actually Sri Lanka has the highest Gini index relative to other countries. And estimates are for the latest available household survey. So Sri Lanka is doing pretty bad in terms of inequality in the country. And progress on inequality has been much less positive. So it's actually been stagnant or even increasing over time in Sri Lanka. But it's kind of, inequality has remained relatively stable since the early 2000s. So much less rosy picture relative when looking at inequality than when looking at poverty eradication. And another metric of inequality is to look at the share of total income that is going to different groups of the population. And we see that about a third of total income is going to richest households that are in the top 10% of the distribution, and only 4% is going to households at the bottom. And we see that there's very little movement over time, suggesting that there's not been a lot of progress in redistributing resources from the top to the bottom. This is the same graph, but for Sri Lanka, and you see that there's really been a stagnant, there's barely been any movement in the share of income going to different groups of the population. Other metrics of living standards in Sri Lanka look less dramatic. So if we look at an index of job quality, we see that at least among paid employees is doing relatively better than other countries in the region. Female labor force participation is among the lowest in the world in South Asia, and Sri Lanka is not doing particularly well, but it's not among the worst either. And then in terms of other metrics of well-being, so access to health, universal health and education is much higher in Sri Lanka than in other countries in the region, and so are malnutrition and literacy rates, or at least, and once again, these figures are pre-crisis. So just to conclude this conversation, to this presentation, to set a bit the stage for Sri Lanka, a lot of the data that I've shown you until now is based on the latest household survey for Sri Lanka that is from 2019. But as we know, things have changed dramatically in the past 5 years now. At the World Bank, we have a duty to monitor household welfare over time. So we had to come up with, we adopt microsimulation techniques that allow us to track or try and track households' welfare over time. I'm happy to go into more detail on how we do these microsimulations, but let me show you a few graphs and then we can leave the technical details to the Q&A if there's interest. So based on our latest projections, poverty and inequality have increased in Sri Lanka since 2019. Monetary poverty has increased dramatically. We estimate that it has at least doubled since 2019, and its average is over 20%, and is going to stay above 20% for the next few years. Inequality is also expected to have increased. But as I said, the next official household survey is planned for 2025. So only then we will have a way to benchmark these estimates. But so while these estimates are based on projections and simulations, we can kind of benchmark them against other indicators of welfare. And if we take a look at these indicators for the past few years, we see that the percentage of children who are underweight is increasing, has increased a lot since 2022. We also see that stunting and wasting measures are getting worse because of the crisis. And the impact of inflation is translating into an erosion in purchasing power. So the wage index has contracted significantly, both in the public and in the private sector. But people are also losing jobs, so their labor incomes are being particularly compromised, and this can also be seen by the fact that labor force participation continues to decline in the country. So I'll stop here and just to summarize and say that Sri Lanka within South Asian countries is not the country with the highest poverty rates. It does perform worse than other countries in terms of inequality, but our key concern over the past 5 years has been a strong deterioration in living standards among the Sri Lankan population, driven by several factors. That is also translating into monetary poverty increases. As I said, there is a few resources that you can take a look at if you want to know more, and I'll stop there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Much Shah, a very good comprehensive presentation. She touched two things: inequality, the high inequality in Sri Lanka, and the poor living conditions, which are two key things going hand in hand. So we'll talk more about it from our next presenter, who is none other than Dr. Gunatilaka. Introduction about Dr. Herath. Dr. Herath is our Executive Director of the Center for Poverty Analysis. He will speak on the crisis-driven poverty and social protection in Sri Lanka. Dr. Gunatilaka is an agricultural and environmental development economist. Prior to joining SEPA, he was the director of the Environmental and Safeguard Divisions in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of ADB. He also served in different capacities as an economist, environmental specialist, a natural resource economist, and an energy economist. Prior to this appointment, Dr. Gunatilaka also served as professor and the head of the Department of Agricultural Economics at the University of Peratenia in Sri Lanka. Dr. Gunatilaka obtained his PhD in resource economics from the University of Hawaii in the United States. He also has expert training in environmental economics and policy analysis from the University of Harvard in the United States, and on leadership for sustainable development from the University of Cambridge, England. He has published more than 50 journal articles, including 5 books on energy, natural resources, and environmental economics. I would now like to warmly welcome Dr. Gunatilaka to deliver his talk on crisis-driven poverty and social protection.
Thank you, Dika, for your time. And also for joining us and giving a very broad overview about poverty at the global level, touching up some trends in South Asia and Sri Lanka too. So I am thankful to both of you for setting the foundation for me to talk a little bit more about poverty in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka's story of poverty is a bit of a sad one at the moment, because 2, 3, maybe 5 years ago, Sri Lanka was one of the good examples where poverty has been reduced dramatically, and we were somewhere like our poverty levels were like 4% few years ago. But then the economic crisis and prior to that, COVID-19 pandemic has, changed the situation very rapidly. By 2022, according to World Bank estimates, about 26% of our population was in poverty. Now, then in 2023, June 2023, some of the independent estimates show that poverty has further increased up to 30% or 31%. Right now, actually, we don't know what is the poverty level in the country. Department of Census and Statistics did a study last year, published around October, November, about the economic impact of the economic crisis. That report did not publish the poverty ratio in the country. I will come back to that. That is one of the problems we are right now dealing. That poverty situation is rapidly changing in the country, and we really don't know what is happening. And this is also difficult to monitor because since we don't have this digitized income data system, our poverty measurements depend on surveys, which are generally very expensive. So the Department of Census and Statistics will be conducting the next household income and expenditure survey in 2025. So that will comprehensively estimate poverty. But in between, SEPA has done some studies, and also we were planning to do a major poverty study together with the Asian Development Bank and National Planning Department of the Ministry of Finance. But because of the election, it got delayed. Now, when we talk about the poverty and social protection in the country, actually there are many different programs that I will just briefly touch upon these things because all these programs are important for the poverty reduction in the country. Of the programs, actually, most important ones are, one of the most important one is the pre-medicine. Actually, if you look at the budgetary allocations in the country in terms of social protection, the highest amount of money is spent on the pre-medicine, and then followed by fertilizer subsidy, and then actually the so-called social protection program that was, we had previously we had something called Samurdhi, and then this was replaced by Aswasthi. And there, in addition to that, there are various other support, disabled persons, elderly pensions, and various other support programs are there. Actually, the amount spent on those programs are not very high. As you can see that the fertilizer subsidy is the biggest social protection program in a way, but this is also very controversial. Controversial in the sense that, there are two things with the fertilizer subsidy, because subsidizing a polluting input to agriculture is a problem. On one hand, the other hand, that sustainability of this is a problem because, we have been giving that for so many years, but still we were not able to stop it. Even the problem we had sometimes ago, 2-3 years ago, regarding organic farming was also basically because government didn't have enough dollars to import fertilizer to provide the subsidy. That is a questionable kind of social protection. And then Samurdhi is the other one, and also pharmaceutical support or the pre-medicines also underwent through some great difficulties in recent times. Due to the economic crisis, the quality of the medicine and also the supply of some of the medicine, pre-medicine has been a big problem. Actually, this has been studied in the previous studies. Now, our currently ongoing study on poverty also we are studying what is happening with the medicine. But maintaining all these things are also important. But The rest of my presentation mainly deal with the social protection in terms of Samurdhi and Aswasuma. Okay, just very briefly about Samurdhi program. Samurdhi program was started in 1990s, early 1990s. And that program actually is a cash consumption cash grant plus other poverty alleviation. It has the consumption cash grant plus some of the other empowerment elements in it. Like, for example, various programs to enhance incomes, enhancing the skill set and the employment opportunities, and so on and so forth. So it was part of the Samurdhi program. And if you look at the brief, overview about this program, Sri Lankan government spent about 275 billion rupees from 2004 to 2018 for Samurdhi program. And that is on average about 17.2 billion, which is something like at the beginning when dollar was 100 rupees, it was like, $170 million per year at that rate. And also over time, as the poverty levels in the country went down, the number of recipients also declined from 1.8 million to about 1.4 million. And then many reviews have shown that the Samurdhi program has contributed to poverty reduction in the country. But one of the biggest problems in Samurdhi program was the exclusion errors. About 48% of the Samurdhi resources went to those who do not deserve. Basically, that amount went for the non-poor people, which is not actually, in my view, it is not a simple, unavoidable mistake. This is some sort of corruption in the country where, to maintain the political loyalties among the rural population, government purposely did it. Government did not try to actually correct this problem. That means from the total amount we spent, half of the amount actually went to people who do not deserve this support. From that money, we could have done something else. Probably we could have supported through poor or supported, this money could have been spent on education or something else. Now let me go to the Aswasoma program. This in 2023, Samurdhi program was replaced with Aswasoma. Main difference between Aswasoma and Samurdhi is that Aswasoma is a cash grant, consumption cash grant program. It did not have any empowerment elements. So that is one of the problems with Aswasoma, that such a program, of course, we have to appreciate that the government was able to, under very difficult circumstances, to get this, money. That is also close to 200 million. And then, start this Aswasoma program and supported some of the poorest households to survive through the very bad, difficult time. While appreciating that, you should also understand that Aswasoma may not necessarily alleviate poverty, because there is no empowerment element like in Samurdhi. And in fact, continuation of this kind of cash consumption cash grants may even develop some dependency on the government's handouts. So that is one of the biggest problems with the Aswasoma program. If we are redesigning a social protection program, we have to actually combine this consumption cash support together with empowerment elements to generate more employment, to empower women and other vulnerable groups and so on, probably in a slightly different way than Samurdhi has been doing. And then these details are actually, I think I don't need to explain, but the Samurdhi program completed its first year, and the second phase should be starting now. I think it's very, very important that the government do a proper post evaluation of the first. Now, we in our poverty survey that we are conducting now, we are trying to understand the assessment program better, and we are asking some questions from the household. How did they spend that money that were given to them? Now, the biggest problem of Aswasuma is the same problem that we had in summer. To look at the process of selecting households, actually this program developed 21 or 22 criteria to identify households, very complicated system that required some form of training for those who are doing this identification. SEPA was supposed to do a training of trainers under a World Bank project, but somehow this did not happen because of a gazette notification that stated that if there are errors in selecting households, then the Gram Niladhari and Samudra Niladhari will be responsible for that or something. Then those officers threatened to do a strike. And finally, this selection, SEPA's training program for trainers did not take place. And this selection of the households happened without any transparent process. Households were selected. That's why if you go back to the previous slide, you will see that there are so many, applicants, about 3.7 million applicants. And then the eligible number was about 1.8 million. There are about over 1 million appeals and 134,000 objections. So that process actually was not a very smooth one. Somehow these things were, there's no proper evaluation study as to whether those appeals were properly handled and so on. But most importantly, that there were some evaluations there. There's support from UN Women. We can see clearly that some people who really deserving these Aswasuma benefits did not receive it. And then we did a preliminary assessment. SEPA did a study on the impact of electricity tariff on women and household welfare generally. Through that survey, we just estimated the exclusion errors of Aswasuma in a very simple manner. In this survey, we estimated poverty using both expenditure approach and multidimensional approach. And then we asked a simple question from the households: did you receive Aswasuma or not? Based on that response, we came out that the expenditure poverty measure, about 74%, nearly 75% of the household who have been identified by us in our survey have not received Aswasuma. Similarly, multidimensional poverty, about 70%. Now, these numbers are not very, I would say they are not absolute numbers, but they indicate that there's a very high exclusion error in Aswasuma program too. We can further refine these numbers because we are now doing another 2,500 household survey by using SEPA's own money. Now, when we combine these two surveys, about 5,000 household survey, we can refine these numbers. But these are actually telling us that Aswasuma program has not been able to resolve the issue of exclusion errors. And also it didn't have any proper graduation policy. Let me further talk about this survey that we did. Actually, the survey covered about 2,500 households in 12 districts. The sampling method, actually, we purposely select the district and divisional secretariat, and then randomly selected 4 Gram Niladhara divisions from each divisional secretariat divisions, and then households also were selected randomly. We have completed the survey. We are now drafting the report. I want to present some of the preliminary findings of this survey. Now, the multidimensional poverty measure used these criteria, which are the same criteria that is being used by the Department of Census and Statistics in its household expenditure and income and expenditure survey. We didn't want to deviate too much. Then, we cannot compare our results with the other results. And then, just to study as to how we can really help reducing the exclusion errors in identifying poor households, we develop a probit model that using some of the determinants of poverty first. Probit is a probabilistic regression model, those who know econometrics. And then, as you can see, I'm not going into the lot of the details, but majority of the variables that we use in the probit regression provided us the expected sign as well as statistical significance. That is also telling us that our survey instrument and our data collection methodology and so on, these good results also validate the construct validity of our survey. Now, if you look at the variables, like larger families have more probability to be poor, and the families with better education are less likely to be poor. Things like that we expect in theory, we saw in these results. Among them, the electricity consumption is negatively related with very high significance level. I mean, poor households use small quantity of electricity. But our objective is to see whether that electricity consumption can be used to measure poverty. That is why we did this regression. And then I'm not going to go into the details of all the variables. If you want, we can go there again during the discussion. But then what we did was, this probit model allow us to predict the probability of a household being poor. If you take all the means of the variables that we use in our regression, the probability of being poor at the mean electricity consumption is like 0.72. So that is much better than 48% exclusion error if you use the mean level. But then we went further. These are the predicted probabilities with different levels of electricity consumption. We went further and we did a simulation actually using two additional variables. One is the education level of the household. One is the family size. Both can be, the data can be obtained from these two without doing a survey from the secondary sources. Now, and then we use the electricity consumption as 75 units per month, which is also not randomly selected. We did another regression using the expenditure and consumption, and then using the official poverty line, we identified this the electricity consumption at the poverty line on average is like 74 units. Now, if you use that, you can predict the probability of being poor at 99%. So that is a very important finding, because given the rapidly changing poverty dynamics, doing surveys every 3 months is not possible. Every 6 months is not possible, but we need to monitor poverty frequently. If we have a system like this, then actually we can use this to monitor, because now HIAs will do the poverty assessment next year, and then we can refine this model further. In fact, we are still doing the analysis. These are preliminary findings. We want to do a simultaneous equation model, further improve this. Then probably we can use electricity alone. And also we can do further refinements. Now, one of the most important thing in this study is that the previous studies on this, there are a couple of studies done by Professor Dilip Gunawardhan and others, but they did not have actual electricity consumption data. What we did was that we took a picture of the electricity bill and got the account number and then got actual electricity consumption data from the ceiling. That was the major difference in this study that significantly improved the results. So that is actually one of the important things that we can use in identifying households, as well as identifying not only identifying this kind of monitors. As I tell you now, the poverty levels in 2023 was 31%. Now, our estimate in this survey is like 59% of the households are poor according to expenditure criteria. Somebody may say this is not true, but I also was not confident enough to present this result when I saw this. But there's another survey done by a UN agency which has also come out with the same number. The multidimensional one came at 32%. So now this is also another important one, as my presentation title, I said, at the crisis situation, is multidimensional poverty measure the right measure to measure poverty? Because if you look at the multidimensional measure, we are looking at the access to public services, health, education, assets, and so on, which are not changing rapidly, but incomes are changing in a severe economic crisis rapidly. So therefore, I think, although this is not conclusive, one of the problems in our HIES poverty measure, multidimensional poverty measure, it doesn't consider income at all. So we need to have a combination of income and multidimensional poverty measures. And also we need to further study about the usefulness of multidimensional measure to understand the rapidly changing poverty situation in a crisis. And also I think another important matter that I thought I should present in this one is, in my presentation is, there are a lot of discussion previously about the economic growth, the importance of economic growth and poverty reduction. We all know that growth alone will not be sufficient for poverty reduction. But in a crisis situation where economic growth is negative or very low, actually the importance of the growth has to be highlighted. Because if economy doesn't grow, what is there to distribute? Of course, now if you look at the growth elasticity of poverty in the country, it's negative. Growth elasticity of poverty is that percentage change in poverty divided by percentage in economic growth. Empirically, you can estimate. These are simple estimates. These are not parametric estimates. You can see that these are very small up to 2030. That is because our poverty levels are very low. When poverty is 4, 5, 6%, growth become more ineffective in reducing poverty without supplementary policy measures. Now look at what happened in the last one, 2019 to 2022, it has increased. Absolute number increased to 1.23. So that means the impact of growth on poverty is now enlarging with the mass scale poverty. Now here, what in the situation, we are in a situation where a lot of the people who were non-poor, who were engaging in productive economic activities, are pushed to poverty due to the crisis. Now growth has to happen and take them back to this productive economic life to reduce poverty. Therefore, growth, although it's not sufficient, growth is very important during next 4 or 5 years. Of course, as my other colleagues mentioned, that we need to make sure that growth is more inclusive. And also we need to have other supplementary policies to enhance the growth effect on poverty, education, health, Again, now when you think about crisis-driven poverty, now traditionally we talk a lot about education. Now, by increasing investment on education right now, we may not see a lot of effect immediately because it's a long term. Therefore, we need to rethink our strategy in poverty reduction because we are in a crisis. So I think that's all I want to present. And I think this, in terms of the economic growth, also I would like to mention one more thing that you might have seen that the Economic Nobel Prize was given to some authors who wrote a book called Why Nations Fail. They were emphasizing the importance of economic institutions. They were telling that when you have inclusive economic institutions in a country, institutions here is not like institutes like finance ministry. We are talking about broader set of rules, regulations, laws, beliefs, customs that are governing individual behavior in a country. So when you have right kind of economic institutions, those countries grow and become prosperous. Now, actually, in Sri Lanka, I have mentioned it in many forums that we have not even studied our economic institutions properly. If we are to really encourage growth that is inclusive and employment friendly, I think we need to undertake a detailed study on economic institutions in the country, identify their weaknesses, and our reform should be focused on that. So that actually, in fact, SEPA prepared a proposal and submitted to US agency. If you are lucky to get that funding, we have 3 years time. Probably we can do a comprehensive study. And these are some of the concluding thoughts that is very important for us to handle the exclusion errors. Because if now my estimate here is 60%, at least if it is 40% or 50% of the population, then we need a huge amount of resources. We don't have the luxury of wasting that resource by giving it to non-poor people. That's one. Second thing, we also need to have a very good graduation strategy because the economic burden of supporting 40-50% of the population is very difficult for a bankrupt country. So we have to use whatever resources very efficiently. Therefore, exclusion errors should be minimized and there should be a proper graduation policy. And also, in order to support that, we need to monitor poverty frequently. We cannot do surveys, they are expensive. Even our survey, without SEPA staff salaries, one household survey costs about $6,000, 6,000 rupees. So when you do 10,000, 15,000 surveys, it comes to a huge amount. Therefore, we need to have a system where at least we do a major survey, 1 or 2 years, maybe 1 to 3 years time, then in between there should be a simple way to monitor poverty. Also that monitoring should be linked to the graduation policy. So electricity consumption may be a good tool to do that. Still, I think we need to do further refinement of what we have done. Our preliminary result shows that it can predict poverty with a reasonable accuracy. And also, I think the poverty reduction in a crisis time, we might have to rethink about our strategies. This is a different time. It's not like from the post-independent period, we started with a very large, poverty percentage, maybe 70% or so. Gradually, it came down. Economy was growing, although slowly. Things are normal. But here, actually, it's very turbulent situation. We need to really look at literature and get the expert opinions as to how we should handle the poverty reduction in the crisis. And finally, economic growth is very important, but we need to really make sure that it is employment friendly, it is inclusive, and it really reduces poverty. And also from the World Bank, Martha's presentation, something came out that Sri Lanka's inequality is also the highest in the region. As I have presented in the Poverty Forum, that the inequality dampen the impact of growth. With the growth, if inequality increase, poverty reduction will be less. So we have to keep an eye on that and also take necessary measures to reduce the inequality. I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hera. I think that was a very valuable presentation. Dr. Hera emphasized on inclusive growth and also a dependent economy, both which we have to keep checking to reduce poverty. So thank you all once again. I just want to thank three speakers, Dr. Babajanan and Dr. Martha Shock and Dr. Gunatilaka for your valuable time and insightful contributions. And I also wish to thank Professor Kamina, Gujarat Chairperson of SEPA, as well as everyone joining us here, both physically on site and online, for gracing this occasion in view of the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty and the 25th Research, Reflection and Practices session. I would also like to express my heartfelt gratitude to the SEPA team behind the scene and to ADFACT and BR for their unwavering support. Finally, I'm pleased to announce that the next RRP session will take place on 30th of October, focusing on the economic and social cause of corruption. Can Sri Lanka survive without eliminating corruption? By Dr. Hera Gunatilaka. We hope you will join us then. Thank you once again and ask for some questions. Thank you.